The crack of a pistol shot echoed across the dusty main street of Wallace, Montana Territory, shattering the quiet April morning of 1878 like a hammer on glass. Nora Nielsen clutched her carpetbag tighter, dust swirling around her skirts as she stepped off the stagecoach and into chaos. Two men faced each other in the street, one slumped against a hitching post, blood seeping through his fingers as he clutched his shoulder. "That'll teach you to cheat at cards, Blackwell," the standing man shouted, holstering his smoking pistol before noticing Nora. His eyes narrowed beneath his hat brim, taking in her city clothes and uncertain posture. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't how she'd pictured her arrival. After 3 weeks of grueling travel from Philadelphia, she'd expected to be greeted by her fiancé, Thomas Morgan, not gunfire and violence. "Miss, you look lost." The stagecoach driver set her trunk down beside her. "Someone meeting you?" "Yes," Nora nodded, smoothing her travel-wrinkled skirt. "Mr. Thomas Morgan. I'm his. Intended." The words felt strange on her tongue. She'd only exchanged letters with Thomas for 6 months before accepting his proposal, his descriptions of Montana and promises of a good life convincing her to leave everything familiar behind. The driver's expression changed. "Morgan, Thomas Morgan," something in his tone sent a chill through her. "Yes. Do you know where I might find him?" The driver exchanged glances with the station manager who had emerged from the building. "Miss, I think you'd best speak with Sheriff Doyle." 20 minutes later, Nora sat in the sheriff's office, a cup of cooling coffee untouched before her as she struggled to comprehend what she was hearing. "Thomas Morgan passed 3 weeks ago, Miss Nielsen. Influenza took half a dozen folks this winter." Sheriff Doyle's weathered face showed genuine sympathy. "I'm mighty sorry you weren't notified. The Postal Service gets mighty unreliable when the mountain passes are snowed in." Nora stared at the cup, watching ripples form in the dark liquid as her hand trembled. "I see." The words came out hollow. 3 weeks. She'd been traveling while he was already gone. What am I to do now? The reality of her situation crashed down. She was alone in a frontier town with limited funds, no connections, and no prospects. The teaching position Thomas had arranged likely went to someone else. She had sold everything to come west. "The Morgan place is already sold," the sheriff continued awkwardly. "But Wallace is a growing town. Perhaps we could find you work until—" "Sheriff." The door burst open, and a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes stepped inside. His clothes marked him as a rancher, practical, dusty, but of good quality. "Got those strays of yours corralled down at—" He stopped abruptly, noticing Nora. "Miss Nielsen, this is Ross McAllister," Sheriff Doyle said. "Ross, Miss Nielsen here was Thomas Morgan's mail-order bride." Ross McAllister removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with auburn highlights. "My condolences, madam." "Miss Nielsen just learned of Thomas's passing," the sheriff explained. "She's come all this way with nowhere to go." Ross studied her with a thoughtful expression. Nora felt suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance and red-rimmed eyes. "A mail-order bride arrived too late," Ross said quietly, then with more confidence continued. "Well then, you're right on time for me." Nora's head snapped up. "I beg your pardon." Ross stepped forward, settling his hat on the sheriff's desk. "What the sheriff hasn't told you is that I purchased Morgan's place. I've been looking for someone to help with the house and my sister's children. She passed last year, leaving me with 3 young ones I hardly know how to manage." "Mr. McAllister, I'm not seeking employment as a housekeeper," Nora began stiffly. "No, madam, I don't imagine you are. You came out here to be a wife." Ross's directness made her blush. "I'm offering you a temporary arrangement. Room and board, fair wages, and time to decide your future." No obligations beyond that. Sheriff Doyle cleared his throat. Ross's place is respectable, Miss Nielsen. And there's Mrs. Howell who helps with the children. You'd have a proper chaperone. Nora considered her options, which were painfully few. Her remaining money might buy her a week at the hotel, but not passage back east. How far is your ranch, Mr. McAllister? 7 miles north. Good land with a proper house, not some dirt floor cabin. A hint of pride colored his voice. Nora took a deep breath. I accept your offer of employment, temporarily. Ross nodded, seemingly pleased but not overly familiar. I'll have you home by supper time then. The children will be glad to have a new face around. As they left the sheriff's office, Nora cast one last look at the dusty town that had been meant to be her new home. She had come to marry a man she barely knew. Now she was following another stranger altogether. The thought should have terrified her, but oddly, all she felt was a strange sense of inevitability, as though fate had simply redirected her path rather than blocked it entirely. Ross helped her into his wagon with a gentle hand that belied his rugged appearance. I should warn you, Miss Nielsen. My niece and nephews are good children, but they've been without a woman's influence this past year. How old are they? Emma's 8, Joshua's 6, and little Daniel just turned 4. He clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. They miss their mother something fierce. I'm sure they do. Nora watched the town recede behind them. I've some experience with children. I taught school in Philadelphia. Ross glanced at her with new interest. Is that so? We've got a schoolhouse in Wallace, but the teacher left last autumn. Haven't found a replacement yet. Hope flickered in Nora's chest. Perhaps there was still a place for her here after all. I would be interested in applying if the position is still available. I'll speak to the town council, Ross promised, though I'd be sorry to lose you at the ranch so soon. The road followed a creek through rolling grasslands that stretched to distant mountains still capped with snow. After Philadelphia's crowded streets, the vastness was both breathtaking and intimidating. It's beautiful, she murmured, more to herself than to him. It grows on you, Ross replied, his voice softening. First winter nearly sent me packing, but spring comes and you forget the hard times. How long have you been in Montana? 5 years. Came out after the war with my brother-in-law, James. We built the ranch together. His jaw tightened. After James and my sister died of the fever, the place seemed too big for just me and the children. I'm sorry for your loss, Nora said quietly. Ross nodded his thanks, and they fell into companionable silence as the wagon climbed a gentle rise. Cresting the hill, Nora caught her first glimpse of the McAllister ranch, a substantial 2-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. A windmill turned lazily beside a water tank, and several horses grazed in a nearby pasture. That's the main house, Ross pointed. Bunkhouse for the ranch hands is beyond the barn. You'll have your own room upstairs next to Emma's. As they approached, 3 small figures burst from the house and ran toward the wagon, accompanied by a lanky hound dog barking excitedly. Uncle Ross, they called in unison. Ross drew the wagon to a halt and smiled, the first genuine smile Nora had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. Who's that? The oldest boy demanded, staring at Nora with undisguised curiosity. Joshua, mind your manners, Ross chided gently. Children, this is Miss Nielsen. She'll be staying with us and helping around the house. The little girl Emma studied Nora with solemn brown eyes. Are you going to be our new mother? Ross coughed uncomfortably. Miss Nielsen is our guest, Emma. She's going to help us for a while. Nora climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her skirts before kneeling to the child's level. Hello, Emma. I'm very pleased to meet you. And no, I'm not going to be your mother. No one could replace her, but I would like to be your friend if you'll let me." Emma considered this with grave seriousness before nodding once. "Can you braid hair? Mrs. Howell can't do it right." "I can braid hair," Nora confirmed, relieved at the simple request. "Good." Emma took her hand matter-of-factly. "Come see our house." Casting an amused glance at Ross, who shrugged helplessly, Nora allowed herself to be led toward her new temporary home, the two boys trailing behind and the dog circling them all with enthusiastic barks. The house was surprisingly well appointed, with solid furniture and touches that spoke of a woman's hand curtains at the windows, a patchwork quilt over the back of a rocking chair, pressed wildflowers framed on the wall. "Sarah, my sister, made this place a real home," Ross explained, seeing Nora's surprise. "I've tried to keep it that way for the children." A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. McAllister, you're back earlier than expected." "Supper won't be ready for," she stopped, noticing Nora. "Mrs. Howell, this is Miss Nora Nielsen," Ross introduced them. "She'll be staying with us and helping with the children." Mrs. Howell's expression was hard to read, somewhere between relief and suspicion. "Another pair of hands will be welcome indeed. These three are more than a handful." "Mrs. Howell comes in from town 3 days a week," Ross explained. "Her husband runs the mercantile in Wallace." "I'm pleased to meet you," Nora said, extending her hand, which the older woman shook briefly. "Let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before supper," Mrs. Howell said. "Children, wash up and set the table." Upstairs, Nora found herself in a modest but clean bedroom with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the ranch yard. Her trunk arrived shortly, carried up by Ross himself. "It's not much," he said, setting the trunk at the foot of the bed, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." "It's more than generous," Nora assured him. "I'm grateful for your kindness, Mr. McAllister." A shadow of something embarrassment perhaps crossed his face. "Ross. Please call me Ross. And it's not kindness, Miss Nielsen. It's a fair arrangement. You need somewhere to stay, and I need help with the children." When he left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her. That morning, she had expected to meet her future husband. Instead, she learned he was dead and found herself employed by a stranger. She should have been devastated, terrified, or at the very least, overwhelmed. Yet somehow, watching the sun slant through her new window, painting the simple room in gold, Nora felt something unexpected relief. Thomas Morgan had been a practical choice, a solution to her precarious situation in Philadelphia after her parents' deaths left her nearly destitute. She had convinced herself she could learn to love him in time. Now, faced with this unexpected turn of events, Nora realized she had been given something precious: choice. For the first time since receiving Thomas's initial letter, the future seemed full of possibilities rather than obligations. Whatever happened next would be her decision, not necessities. The thought gave her strength as she changed her dress and prepared to face her first evening at the McAllister ranch. Supper was a lively affair, with the children peppering Nora with questions about Philadelphia, the train journey west, and whether she knew how to make apple dumplings like their mother used to make. "Children, let Miss Nielsen eat her supper," Ross admonished, but his eyes held amusement. "It's quite all right," Nora assured him. "And yes, Joshua, I do know how to make apple dumplings. Perhaps we could bake some together soon." The boy's face lit up. "Tomorrow, we'll see," Nora smiled. "First, I need to learn my way around your uncle's kitchen." "It was Mama's kitchen," Emma corrected seriously. "Uncle Ross doesn't cook, he burns everything." Ross laughed, a rich sound that transformed his face again. "She's not wrong. I'm better with horses than pots and pans." After the meal, when the children had been tucked into bed with a story Nora read from a well-worn book of fairy tales, she found Ross on the front porch, smoking a pipe and watching the sunset paint the distant mountains pink and gold. "They settled down quickly," she commented, keeping a proper distance between them as she leaned against the porch railing. "That's a first in months," Ross admitted. "Usually, there's a solid hour of negotiations and complaints before they stay in bed. Children respond to routine. Once they know what to expect, they feel secure." Ross studied her thoughtfully. "You're good with them. They've taken to you already. They're good children. A bit wild, perhaps, but that's to be expected after losing their parents." "I've done my best," Ross said quietly. "But a ranch is no place for a single man to raise 3 young ones. You've given them a home and love. That's what matters most." Nora watched a hawk circle lazily above the pasture. "My parents died within months of each other when I was 16. I understand what it's like to feel adrift." "Is that why you agreed to marry Morgan? To find an anchor?" The direct question startled her. In Philadelphia, such personal inquiries would have been considered terribly forward, but she was learning that frontier manners were more straightforward. "Partly," she admitted. "And partly because teaching positions for unmarried women are scarce and underpaid. Thomas offered security and respect, if not a grand passion." She felt her cheeks warm. "That was probably more candor than you expected, Mr. McAllister." "Ross," he corrected again. "And no, I appreciate honesty. Too many folks out here are running from something or someone. It's refreshing to meet someone who speaks their mind." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Nora woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, she wondered if the previous day had been a dream. Then little Daniel appeared in her doorway, clutching a wooden horse and regarding her solemnly. "Are you awake?" he asked in a stage whisper. "I am now," Nora smiled, sitting up and reaching for her wrapper. "Is everyone else up too?" Daniel nodded. "Uncle Ross is always up first. He's with the horses. Mrs. Howell is making breakfast. Emma says I should show you my toys." "I would love to see your toys, but first I need to get dressed." "Why don't you wait for me downstairs?" The day quickly fell into a rhythm. After breakfast, Mrs. Howell explained the household routines: laundry on Mondays, baking on Wednesdays, the children's lessons in the mornings, and the various chores that needed attention. Nora listened carefully, taking mental notes and already considering how she might implement a more structured educational program for the children. Ross left after breakfast to tend to ranch business, returning briefly at midday for a cold lunch before heading back out. Nora spent the morning getting to know the children better, assessing their educational levels, and exploring the house to familiarize herself with its layout. By late afternoon, when Mrs. Howell departed for town, promising to return the day after tomorrow, Nora felt she had a reasonable grasp of what would be expected of her. What she hadn't expected was the wave of loneliness that washed over her as she watched the children playing in the yard while she prepared vegetables for supper. This wasn't her home. These weren't her children. The man who would return for supper wasn't her husband. Yet somehow, she felt more connected to this place after one day than she had ever felt in Philadelphia after her parents' deaths. "You look deep in thought," Nora started, nearly dropping the knife she was using to slice carrots. Ross stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light momentarily. "I didn't hear you come in," she said, resuming her task. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change." Ross washed his hands at the pump sink. "Having second thoughts about staying?" "No," she answered truthfully. "I'm grateful for your offer. I'm just adjusting." "Fair enough." He dried his hands on a towel. "I spoke with Bill Jenkins in town this morning. He's on the school board. They're mighty interested in meeting you about the teaching position. Could be ready for you to start after spring planting is done if you're still interested." Hope flared in Nora's chest. "I am, very much so." "Good. We can ride into town Saturday if that suits." He hesitated. "Though I meant what I said yesterday. You're welcome here for as long as you need, even if you take the teaching position." The sincerity in his voice warmed her. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't appeared in the sheriff's office yesterday." "Found another solution, I expect," Ross said matter-of-factly. "You don't strike me as a woman who gives up easily." Before she could respond, the children burst into the kitchen, clamoring for attention and snacks, and the moment passed. That night, after the house grew quiet, Nora sat at the small desk in her room and began a letter to her friend Harriet in Philadelphia, trying to explain the strange turn her life had taken. How did one describe Ross McAllister? Not traditionally handsome, perhaps, but striking, tall and lean, with those startling blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. Capable hands, a voice that could gentle children and horses alike, and an unexpected kindness beneath his reserved exterior. Realizing she'd spent 3 paragraphs describing a man she barely knew, Nora set down her pen with a sigh. This was absurd. She had known Ross McAllister for exactly 1 day. Whatever she was feeling was simply gratitude and perhaps relief at finding a safe harbor in what could have been a disastrous situation. Still, as she blew out her lamp and slipped beneath the covers, Nora couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if she'd arrived in Wallace on time, if Thomas Morgan had lived, and she had married him as planned. Would she have been happy as his wife? Or would she have spent years looking across the valley toward the McAllister ranch, wondering about the man who lived there with his sister's children? The thought disturbed her more than it should have. Days fell into a pattern. Mornings were spent with the children on their lessons, afternoons on household tasks, and evenings together as a family, for that was what they were becoming, even temporarily. Ross would read from the newspaper or a book while Emma practiced her sewing. The boys played checkers, and Nora mended clothes or prepared lessons for the next day. Sometimes, when the children were in bed, Ross would invite her to sit on the porch and watch the stars appear. They would talk about books they had read, places they had seen, hopes for the children's futures. Never about themselves, never crossing the invisible line that kept their relationship strictly proper. But Nora found herself watching him when he wasn't looking the way the sun had burnished his skin to bronze, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the gentleness in his powerful hands when he lifted Daniel onto his shoulders. A week passed, then 2. Spring advanced across the valley, painting the grasslands with wildflowers. Nora met with the school board and was offered the teaching position to begin in June after spring planting finished. She accepted, both thrilled at the opportunity and oddly reluctant to leave the ranch. Ross insisted she continue staying with them even after she began teaching. "The school is only 3 miles from here," he pointed out. "I can take you in the morning and fetch you after. Makes more sense than you staying in town, unless you'd prefer that." "No," Nora said quickly. "Too quickly, perhaps. I'd rather stay here if you're certain I'm not imposing." "Your family now," he said simply. "To the children, at least." The qualifier stung more than it should have. May brought warmer days and the bustle of planting. The ranch hands worked from dawn to dusk, and often Ross with them. Nora found herself taking on more household responsibilities, giving Mrs. Howell well-deserved time off, and caring for the children almost exclusively. It was during this busy time that Nora discovered Emma crying quietly in the barn one evening. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting beside the girl on a hay bale. "I miss Mama," Emma sniffled, "and I'm forgetting what she looked like." Nora's heart ached for the child. "That happens sometimes when we lose someone we love. But you know what? Your mother lives in your heart and in your memories." "But what if I forget the memories too?" Nora considered this. "Would you like to make a memory book? We could write down all the stories you remember about your mother, and maybe your uncle has some sketches or photographs we could include." Emma's tears slowed. "Could we? Uncle Ross doesn't like talking about Mama. It makes him sad." "I think he'd make an exception for this," Nora assured her. "Sometimes talking about the people we've lost helps keep them close to us." That night, after the children were asleep, Nora approached Ross with her idea. They were on the porch, as had become their custom, the spring air sweet with the scent of wildflowers. "Emma's afraid she's forgetting Sarah," Nora explained. "I thought a memory book might help all three children preserve what they remember." Ross was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkened valley. "I should have thought of that myself," he finally said. "They need to remember her." "It's hard to think clearly when you're grieving," Nora said gently. "And you've had the weight of the ranch and 3 children on your shoulders." "Sarah would have known what to do." His voice was rough with emotion. "She was always the strong one, always knew exactly what the children needed." "You're doing a fine job, Ross. The children adore you." He turned to look at her then, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, Sarah was fair where you're dark, but in spirit, the way you are with the children. The way you seem to understand what they're feeling before they say it." The comparison to his beloved sister was both touching and painful. Nora didn't want Ross to see her as a substitute sibling. What did she want? The thought frightened her. "I'll help Emma start the book tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. "Perhaps you could look for any drawings or photographs you might have of Sarah." "I'll find something," he promised. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and took her hand. "Thank you, Nora, for everything you've done for us." His palm was warm against hers, calloused from ranch work but gentle in its grip. Nora's heart stuttered in her chest. "I've done nothing you wouldn't have managed yourself given time." "That's not true, and you know it." His thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "You've brought light back into this house." For one breathless moment, Nora thought he might kiss her. Instead, he released her hand and stood up. "It's late. We both have an early start tomorrow." Confused and oddly disappointed, Nora bid him good night and retreated to her room, where sleep eluded her for hours. The memory book project occupied the children's evenings for the next week. Ross surprised them all by producing not only a small daguerreotype type of Sarah, but also a pencil sketch he had done himself, capturing her laughing expression with remarkable skill. "Uncle Ross used to draw pictures all the time," Joshua informed Nora proudly. "Mama said he could have been a famous artist." "I didn't know you were an artist," Nora said, studying the sketch with genuine admiration. Ross shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "Just a hobby. Haven't had much time for it lately." "You should make time," Nora urged. "You have real talent." Later that evening, when the children were asleep, Nora found Ross in the small room he used as an office, sorting through a drawer of papers. "I thought you might want these for the memory book," he said without looking up as she entered. "Letters Sarah wrote to me during the war." Nora approached cautiously, aware that she was being invited into a private part of his life. "Are you sure? Letters can be very personal." "There are a few I'll keep private," he acknowledged. "But the rest, they show who she was, her hopes for the future. The children should know that part of her." Nora accepted the small bundle, tied with faded ribbon. "I'll make sure they're handled with care." Ross finally looked up, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I want to thank you again for suggesting this. It's been good for the children. Good for me too, if I'm honest. Grief needs an outlet, Nora said softly. Even years later. Are you speaking from experience? Nora nodded. After my parents died, I packed away all their belongings. Couldn't bear to look at them. It was Harriet, my friend in Philadelphia, who convinced me to create a memory box. Just small things that reminded me of them. It helped. And do you still have this box? No, Nora admitted. I sold most of my possessions to pay for the journey west. The memory box stayed with Harriet for safekeeping. Understanding dawned in Ross's eyes. You've lost everything, twice. Not everything, Nora corrected gently. I have my health, my education, and now a teaching position. That's more than many can claim. Ross stood and came around the desk, closer than propriety strictly allowed. You're a remarkable woman, Nora Nielsen. The way he said her name soft, almost reverent, made her breath catch. I'm really quite ordinary. No, he shook his head. You're not. You've faced loss and hardship, yet you still find ways to help others heal. That's extraordinary. He was close enough now that she could see the different shades of blue in his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always accompanied him. Nora should have stepped back, maintained a proper distance, but she found herself unable or unwilling to move. Ross, she began, uncertain what she meant to say. A crash from upstairs broke the moment. Daniel's frightened cry followed immediately. Nightmare, Ross said, already moving toward the door. Third one this week. Nora followed him upstairs, where they found Daniel sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face. Ross gathered the boy into his arms, murmuring reassurances while Nora checked that the other children remained asleep. Stay, Daniel pleaded when Ross tried to lay him back down. Bad men were chasing me. No bad men here, Ross promised. Just a dream. Miss Nora could tell a story, Daniel suggested, his tears subsiding. About the night and the dragon, Ross glanced at Nora questioningly. It's a story I made up for him last week, she explained. I'd be happy to tell it again. So they sat on either side of Daniel's small bed, as Nora spun a tale of a brave knight who discovered the dragon he feared was actually lonely and misunderstood. By the time the knight and dragon became friends, Daniel's eyelids were drooping. Sleep now, Ross whispered, tucking the blanket around his nephew. We're right here, in the hallway outside the children's rooms. Ross paused. You're good at that, making up stories. It's part of being a teacher, Nora smiled. Children learn best when they're engaged by the material. Is that all it is? Being a good teacher, the question seemed to have layers of meaning Nora couldn't quite grasp. What else would it be? Ross studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. Nothing. Forget I asked. He stepped back. Good night, Nora. Good night, Ross. As May gave way to June, the rhythm of ranch life shifted. Planting finished, and preparations began for the summer cattle drive. The house grew busier with ranch hands coming and going, Mrs. Howell staying overnight to help with increased cooking demands, and Ross working from dawn until well after dusk. Nora, meanwhile, prepared for her first day of teaching. The schoolhouse in Wallace had been cleaned and stocked with new slates and readers, and 20 children from surrounding farms and ranches were enrolled for the summer session. The night before her first day, Nora sat at her desk, reviewing her lesson plans one last time when a knock came at her door. Come in, she called, expecting one of the children. Instead, Ross entered, carrying a small wooden box. I have something for you, a gift for your first day of teaching. Surprised, Nora set down her pen. That's very thoughtful, but you've already done so much. Just open it, Ross interrupted, setting the box on her desk. Inside, Nora found a beautiful fountain pen and a leather-bound journal. its cover tooled with a simple design of wildflowers. "The pen was my father's," Ross explained. "And the journal I noticed you writing in the evening sometimes. Thought you might like something special for your teaching notes." Touched beyond words, Nora ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept your father's pen. It should stay in your family." "You've become family, Nora." Ross's voice was quiet but certain. "To the children, to me." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. "Ross, you don't need to say anything," he cut in quickly. "I just wanted you to have something meaningful for tomorrow. It's an important day." Nora stood, the journal clutched to her chest. "Thank you. I'll treasure them both." He nodded, seemingly relieved she hadn't pressed him to explain his words further. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he left, Nora sat for a long time, turning the pen in her fingers and wondering what Ross had meant by calling her family. Was it simply an acknowledgement of her role in the children's lives? Or was it something more, something he wasn't quite ready to put into words? Nora's first day as the teacher of Wallace's one-room schoolhouse was both exhilarating and exhausting. Her 20 pupils ranged in age from 6 to 15, with widely varying levels of previous education. By the time the last child departed at 3 o'clock, she had a throbbing headache and a newfound respect for her own teachers in Philadelphia. As promised, Ross arrived to drive her back to the ranch, the children bouncing excitedly in the wagon bed, eager to hear about her day. "How did it go?" Ross asked as he helped her into the seat beside him. "Challenging," Nora admitted, "but rewarding. They're good children, just at very different levels. It will take time to develop a program that serves them all." "The town's lucky to have you," Ross said. "Most teachers who come out this way don't last a season before heading back east." "I'm not going back east," Nora said with more force than she intended. Ross glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Glad to hear it." In the weeks that followed, Nora settled into her role as teacher while maintaining her place in the McAllister household. It was an unusual arrangement, a single woman living with a single man and his niece and nephews, but the presence of Mrs. Howell and the clear need for Nora's help with the children kept gossip to a minimum. Still, Nora was acutely aware that the situation couldn't continue indefinitely. She had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months now. Eventually, she would need to find more permanent accommodations in town, as befitted her position as the school teacher. The thought filled her with a surprising sadness. When had the McAllister ranch become home? When had Ross and the children become the family? She looked forward to seeing each day. July brought scorching heat, and the busiest time for the ranch, preparing for the cattle drive to Billings. Ross worked from before sunrise until well after dark, often too exhausted for more than a brief conversation before retiring. It was during this busy time that Nora received a letter that changed everything. The envelope bore the return address of Harriet's home in Philadelphia, but the handwriting wasn't her friend's. Harriet's husband, Edward, wrote that Harriet had fallen ill with pneumonia and passed away in June. Before her death, she had asked that Nora's memory box be sent to her in Montana, along with a letter Harriet had written during her illness. With trembling hands, Nora opened the second envelope that had been enclosed with Edward's letter. "My dearest Nora," Harriet had written in a shaky hand. "If you are reading this, then I have left this world before seeing you again. Please do not grieve over much. I have lived a good life, filled with friendship and love, and that is what I wish to speak to you about, dear friend. Love." In your letters, you write of the McAllister family with such warmth and affection. Of the children, certainly, but also of their uncle. You may not see it yourself yet, but I recognize the signs. You are falling in love with this man. and from what you've written of him, he may well return your feelings. Life is too short and too precious to waste in hesitation, Nora. If you love him, tell him. If he loves you, marry him. Build the family you have always deserved but were denied by fate's cruel hand. Your memory box accompanies this letter. I hope it brings you comfort and reminds you that while we must honor the past, we cannot live in it. Your future awaits in Montana. Embrace it with the courage I have always admired in you. With eternal friendship and love, Harriet. Tears blurred Nora's vision as she folded the letter. Harriet dear, practical Harriet whose friendship had sustained her through the darkest days after her parents' deaths. Gone now, like so many others she had loved, but Harriet's final gift wasn't just the return of precious mementos. It was permission, encouragement, even to acknowledge what Nora had been trying desperately to ignore, her growing feelings for Ross McAllister. Did she love him? The question terrified her. She had come west to marry a stranger out of practical necessity. What she felt for Ross was nothing like the resigned acceptance she had felt toward her arrangement with Thomas Morgan. This was altogether different, a warmth that kindled whenever he entered a room, a sense of rightness when they sat together on the porch in the evenings, an ache of longing when their hands accidentally touched. Yes, she loved him. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. But did he love her? He had called her family, treated her with respect and kindness, entrusted his precious niece and nephews to her care. But was that love or simply appreciation for her role in their lives? The memory box arrived a week later, a simple wooden chest containing the few treasures she had salvaged from her parents' belongings. A cameo brooch that had been her mother's, her father's pocket watch, a pressed flower from her mother's garden, a small book of poetry with her father's name inscribed inside the cover. Nora sat on her bed, these precious items spread before her, when a knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, hastily wiping away tears. Ross entered, then stopped short when he saw her tear-streaked face and the items on the bed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Nora assured him. "Please come in." He approached cautiously, taking in the collection of objects. "Your memory box arrived," Nora nodded, "along with news that my friend Harriet has passed away." "I'm so sorry," Ross said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "She was the one who kept it for you." "Yes, she was my dearest friend. After my parents died, she and her husband helped me find work as a teacher." Nora picked up the cameo brooch. "This was my mother's. She wore it every Sunday to church." Ross sat beside her on the edge of the bed, their shoulders almost touching. "Tell me about her, your mother." And so Nora did, telling him about Margaret Nielsen's love of gardening, her talent for making even the simplest meal seem special, her gentle but firm guidance. Then she told him about her father, Henry, a bookkeeper who had taught her to love numbers and logic, who had read to her every night until she was old enough to read to him instead. "They sound like wonderful people," Ross said when she finished. "They raised a remarkable daughter." Nora smiled through her tears. "They would have liked you, I think, especially my father. He admired people who worked with their hands, created things of value. Like you with your teaching," Ross observed, "and you with this ranch." Nora hesitated, then added softly, "with the family you're creating for the children." Ross looked down at his hands. "I've done my best, but a man alone can only do so much." "You're not alone," Nora said before she could lose her courage. "Not anymore." His head lifted, eyes searching hers. "What are you saying, Nora?" Heart pounding, she took Harriet's advice and spoke the truth. "I'm saying that I care deeply for you, Ross McAllister, for you and for the children, more than I ever expected to when I arrived in Wallace." "Nora," his voice was rough with emotion. "I've wanted to tell you for weeks now. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day in the sheriff's office when you held your head high despite having your world turned upside down. Joy bubbled through Nora's veins like champagne. You love me. More than I thought possible, Ross admitted. But I didn't want to speak too soon. You came here to marry another man. I didn't want you to feel obligated or rushed into something you might regret. The only thing I regret, Nora said, taking his hand in hers, is not telling you sooner how much you've come to mean to me, how much I love you. Ross raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I never thought I'd find love again after Catherine, my wife, died during the war. When Sarah and James passed, leaving me with the children, I figured my life would be about them from then on. But then you arrived and everything changed. For me too, Nora whispered. This time, when Ross leaned toward her, there was no interruption. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. When they finally parted, Ross rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Nora. Be my wife, a mother to the children. Make this house a home again. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed in late August in the small church in Wallace. Emma served as Nora's bridesmaid, Joshua carried the rings on a small cushion, and Daniel scattered wildflower petals down the aisle ahead of the bride. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, with tables laden with food and a fiddle band playing long into the night. Nora continued teaching, riding to the schoolhouse each morning with the children and returning to the ranch each afternoon to the home and family she had never expected to find when she stepped off that stagecoach in April. On their 1-month anniversary, Ross presented her with a surprise, a portrait he had drawn of Nora with the children, all 4 of them laughing together. In the corner he had written simply, "Family." "It's perfect," Nora said, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." "No," Ross corrected, drawing her into his arms. "You're perfect. You arrived exactly when we needed you most." Nora smiled up at her husband, thinking of that fateful day in the sheriff's office. She had arrived too late for Thomas Morgan, but precisely on time for the McAllisters, for Ross, for Emma, Joshua, and Daniel. For the family that was now irrevocably her own. "I love you, Ross McAllister," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you, Nora McAllister," he replied. Now and always. Outside their window, the Montana sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside, surrounded by the family that fate and choice had given her, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, Nora stood on the porch of the McAllister ranch house, watching as Ross taught Joshua how to saddle his new pony. Emma sat nearby, sketching in the journal Ross had given her for her 9th birthday, while Daniel chattered excitedly about when he would be big enough for his own horse. The sound of a baby's cry drew Nora's attention back to the bassinet beside her rocking chair. Little Margaret Sarah McAllister, just 6 weeks old, was awake from her nap and hungry. Lifting her daughter, Nora settled into the rocking chair to nurse, a contentment so deep it bordered on awe filling her heart. If anyone had told her 2 years ago that she would find this life in Montana territory, a loving husband, 4 children who adored her, a teaching position she cherished, and a community that respected her, she would never have believed it possible. The memory of her arrival in Wallace sometimes felt like a story that had happened to someone else. The confusion, the grief upon learning of Thomas Morgan's death, the uncertainty about her future. Now, those moments seemed like necessary steps on the path that led her to Ross and this family they were building together. Ross looked up from the corral, catching her eye and smiling that smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He said something to Joshua, then walked toward the house, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "How are my girls?" he asked, bending to kiss Nora's forehead before peering at their daughter. "Hungry as usual, I see." "Growing strong," Nora agreed, "just like her father." Ross settled into the chair beside hers, reaching out to stroke the baby's soft, dark hair. "I was thinking we might have a picnic by the creek tomorrow. Weather's supposed to be fine and the children have been asking to go fishing." "That sounds wonderful," Nora agreed. "I'll pack a basket in the morning." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the older children and the rhythm of ranch life unfolding around them, ranch hands moving cattle to a new pasture, the windmill turning lazily in the afternoon breeze, a hawk circling high above. "Happy?" Ross asked quietly, his hand finding hers. Nora squeezed his fingers, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the losses and gains, the unexpected twists of fate and the choices that had shaped her life. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he assured her. "Sometimes I think about that day you arrived in Wallace, if Thomas Morgan had lived." "Don't," Nora interrupted gently. "We can't change the past, and I wouldn't want to, not anymore. This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Ross lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You were right on time, Nora McAllister, right on time for all of us." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in golden light, Nora looked around at the life she had found here, at the husband who adored her, the children who had welcomed her into their hearts, the home they had built together. She had arrived in Montana territory seeking security and found love instead. Arrived too late for one future, but exactly on time for another, infinitely better one. And for that, she would be forever grateful.